Okay, so now we'll continue our discussion with chapter 11, which is about operating system security. So when we talk about protecting our data and our processes and applications from different kinds of attacks, we also need to find out and talk about the weaknesses of our operating system, because at the end of the day, it is our operating system that actually houses everything. That's what runs everything else. So be it a computer or a router or a smartphone, we need to take care of protecting our operating systems, because they're the basis of practically everything else in our system. So there are a number of ways in which we can actually prevent and mitigate different threats and the vulnerabilities that we may have in an operating system. So one of those easiest ways to do what is referred to as operating system hardening. And we can use this technique when we're configuring different hosts. And hosts, again, I'll remind you, is the term used for different computers or clients or devices in short. I mean, that's a generic term. So we basically actually do what is referred to as operating system hardening in order to protect our different hosts. We can also add different kinds of tools and applications to our operating system to actually make them capable of fighting against attackers and any kind of malwares. We could use anti-malware tools, we could use antiviruses, we could use a lot of host-based intrusion detection system, which we talked about in our earlier chapter discussion, and even use software firewalls. So there are several other techniques and security tools that are available for us to protect our hosts. So a combination of all of these can make our operating system pretty strong and pretty powerful. So operating system hardening. Now, what exactly is operating system hardening? We arrive at this concept by understanding that operating system hardening is all about reducing the number of possibilities that our operating system could be attacked. So the total of these areas is referred to as our attack surface, and we need to reduce our attack surface. The larger it is, the more we can be damaged. Now there's this figure called figure 11.1, which has 6 main hardening categories. So it is divided into removing unnecessary software, removing unneeded services, and altering default accounts, using the principle of least privilege, making sure that your operating system is updated and patched, and implementing logging and auditing. Now, none of these things are new. We've already discussed them in one form or another in our previous chapters, but we'll discuss them one by one right now. So in order to actually create hardening, what we need to do is to actually focus on our all of these steps. And how do we do that? You see, each of these areas is where this insecurity happens. Each of these area increases the attack surface. So by actually doing all of this, we'll be reducing our attack surface. We'll be using the possible weak spots or the potential weak spots of our operating system. So we should always make sure that any changes that we make to our operating system and settings and tools are something that we know about, because any changes or any kind of hanky-panky with the operating system could cause tremendous damage to our computer itself, because then we might not be able to use a lot of things. So we need to know what we're doing, and we need to know how we're handling it. So you need to learn about it before you actually mess around with it. So each piece of software installed in an operating system adds to our attack surface. So it's pretty practical. Think about it. Removing all unnecessary software. What do we really mean? Think about the fact that every piece of application software that you're installing is essentially creating a new use for your operating system. But along with that use, it actually creates another possible way of causing damage to you. So if you really want to harden our operating system, we need to get rid of any kind of useless or unneeded software. I mean, why have them and have a potential weakness when you don't even need them? So why not just install the bare minimum softwares? I mean, you could always add them up when you need them. Why keep them installed when you're not even needing them? So if you're preparing a web server, for instance, the example goes, we should have a web server software and any libraries that it requires, which are software libraries or pieces of tools of software that are used for any software application, or any kind of code interpreters or converters, which are tools that allow you to convert anything from machine language or from human language to human understandable language to machine language. Anyways, so you should just have all of those tools, nothing extra. We should remove any kind of applications like Microsoft Office or services like file transfer protocol, because think about it, if you're just creating a web server, you don't need Microsoft Office on a computer like that. You don't need file transfer protocol to be running on a web server, which is just designed to host your website. So since the purpose is just web serving, why install any of these? By installing this, you're adding additional layers of possible attacks, because it's unnecessary. So our problems begin when we keep on installing software that we don't really need. I mean, we're doing it because, we might need it later, but you see, you're adding a potential weakness, because each software will have its own set of weaknesses, which could be exploited by any kind of hacker. So for example, let us say that one of our developer logs in remotely and tries to make changes to the web page and makes changes in the web development software that they need. then they need to evaluate those changes, so they install their favorite web browser on it, right? I mean, think about it. Somebody's trying to check whether the website is running fine, so what they do is they install a web browser or remotely from another location through the network. They install it on the web server. Then after they install the web server, they're like, okay, you know what, I need some plugins in it, so let's install Adobe Flash and Adobe Acrobat Reader, and maybe even a video player to test the video content. In short, what not only have they do these softwares do not belong there, by installing them you're actually causing possible damage. And because this software, and this is the important part, because after this particular test or whatever little use that you had, after a while that software stays there, never gets patched, never gets updated. It's there with all of its newer weaknesses that have been revealed, and it has become a potential hazard. Think of it as, the analogy could be that you're making a window or a door in a house just for your convenience, and then you're leaving it there just like that. You used it, didn't bother locking it, didn't bother improving the lock, didn't bother checking whether the lock is now rusted because it's so old, and it's just there. So it is a possible serious, actually possibly a serious hazard to your security, to your system security, and that is why we should get rid of such kind of softwares.
The second way in which we can harden our operating system is by removing all unessential services. Now, in the same way that removing unessential and unneeded software is important, removing any services. And now what are services? Services are related to the operating system that run in the background. They're like applications, but not really applications. They're part of the operating system. So all of these extra services that are not really required should be shut down. So many operating systems ship with a lot of services that are already on, like, in order to make sure that they're sharing information over the network and locating different devices, synchronizing with things, sending, statistical data to the, operating system manufacturer, developers, So there are a lot of things that really are not required. So turning operating system services off can actually be very experimental, and it can cause problems because a lot of good, useful things might get shut off. But still, you should shut off any of the service that you don't really need. So one of the best things to do first when we're trying to find out any kind of extra services is to actually find out which network ports are those services working from. So all of those network ports that you really don't need should be shut down. So as we already discussed in the chapter before this one, Nmap is an app that actually allows you to find out what services are running on our network and what ports are they using, so that you'll be able to shut them off. So the command for it is an Nmap, and then you add up the IP address, and it's actually shown in figure 11.2 of how it runs. So it will tell you which ports are open and what port numbers are being used for what service. For instance, 22 for TCP, 53 for TCP, so you will know what is running and what is not. So there are some common ones that are given as example. Port 22, which is a remote access to the system, which is secured with a secure shell. Port 53 is the DNS, which translates the names into IP addresses of the websites. For instance, www.google.com gets translated into 192.168 something. Okay, port 80 is the HTTP protocol, which runs the websites, which allows you to access websites. Port 443 is used for HTTPS, which is used for web pages with the secure socket layer, SSL, or the transport layer security. So several other ports are open as well, if you notice in the screenshot, and many of them are not really required, so you can shut them down. For instance, in our case, we need to target ports 22, 80, and 443. Will be perfectly fine if we shut them off, because you don't really need them for a web server, the example that we were going on with. Now, the next way in which you can harden your operating systems is to basically alter your default accounts. In most operating systems, the default account, and I talked about this earlier in the course, is that most of the default accounts on operating systems tend to have admin access. They have complete and absolute control. So unfortunately, this can be very dangerous. So the guest account, should not have that much privilege. It should have limited privilege. So you need to go change our default account settings. So you may also find a large variety of a lot of people who use these, and it could be pretty dangerous to continue to have a default account, because the default account has a lot of default password, default settings, and everything. So a lot of attackers can actually leverage that and cause you damage. In some cases, the default accounts become equipped with a lot of more permission than they should be allowed. which again can be misused by people. So the best way is to actually make sure that we decide what kind of accounts we need and remove all of the access that they have, and remove any kind of extra accounts that you do not require. So for instance, in the case of admin accounts, which are often called administrator or admin or root, we may not be able to actually remove them from the system or the operating system. However, such accounts can be renamed at least. You should call them something else. Don't just call that administrator account that any hacker would actually find out and try and use. Also, most definitely change the default password. That is the stupidest mistake anyone can make. The next way to harden it is to apply the principle of least privilege, which we talked about in tremendous detail in chapter 3. The principle of least privilege means that we only allow a group or a person or an entity or any software or an application the absolute bare minimum permission that they need to do a particular job. Instead of giving them complete authority and then letting them decide what they don't need, we give them the most minimum of authority and then decide how much more they would need to do whatever they want to do. So it's the bare minimum. This would restrict their access to only just what they really need to do. So in almost any modern operating system, we can find tasks a particular user wants to carry out that can be, that would require administrative privilege. And there are many tasks that they won't require administrative privilege. Why give administrative privilege to all users and all applications? We shouldn't. So we limit it. In general, normal operating system users should be allowed to read or write files. They should be able to run programs, but they should be limited to not accessing all the folders. They should not be allowed to access the operating system's folder itself. They should not be allowed to, for instance, to install all sorts of applications or even install applications for that matter. Normal users usually generally don't need to do that. They don't need to go change the hardware functions or the drivers or the operating system itself, right? They don't need that. So why give them the authority? And this should be restricted to the admins only. Even installing software, you must have noticed this happens in our labs where the admin account alone is allowed to install softwares while the rest of the user accounts are not. This is how it should be. On most Unix and Linux operating systems, I've already talked about this back when we were discussing chapter 3, this is not the case. I mean, the users are limited. So although the admin does have a lot of access, the remaining users actually have roles, and very detailed and specific roles. It is the Microsoft based operating system that usually does the opposite. It gives complete authority and complete control to the user's hands, which they usually don't even realize and cause tremendous damage. The same rule applies on Apple iOS and Android operating system in the smartphone area. I've talked about this, how jailbreaking your iPhone or rooting your Android device could be dangerous because you're essentially getting admin access. Now, if you don't know what to do with it, or if you don't know, that it is pretty dangerous, someone else might install an app in your system that would then use your access, your admin access, to cause damage to you. So any infected malware file could then be running on an admin user's account, and that could cause damage. This is why rooting your phone without realizing what it does, because rooting is basically a term used for Linux and Android, which means the same thing as having an admin account, and not realizing what it is can be very dangerous. So you have to be very careful. So if an attacker compromises the user account, they could easily have admin access and they could run practically anything. So if we limit our privileges in our system to the minimum that we need, that would be much better. We only allow people what they do require and make sure that we don't give them any extra privileges. So it's like the analogy, or it could be that if somebody new comes into your home, you only restrict their movement to a specific area. You don't let them roam around the whole place, because that would be a security hazard, right? So you limit their movement. This is exactly how the principle of least privilege actually works. You limit what they can or cannot do. Performing updates, that's the next hardening technique. Of course, regularly and timely updating your operating system is extremely important, and updating your application is extremely important, because if it's not updated, it may not be ready for any kind of attacks. We've already discussed and talked about in class about the We Wanna Cry ransomware, which happened because the operating systems were not patched. So you have to make sure that the operating systems are constantly patched and updated. And in the situation that there are patches which are crucial, they should be installed immediately, and you should not be ignoring those. And Windows 10, for instance, does not let you not install patches. You have to install them, and they get installed automatically. So if you connect any newly installed and completely unpatched system, automatically that could be a target think about it. If there's a network, all systems are patched, and someone connects a new device whose operating system is not patched. Now that one device could cause damage to the entire network. So you have to make sure that they're all patched before they get connected. to the network. So part of solid configuration management is to make sure that you monitor these patch announcements. You actually announce to the entire network that you're updating and making these patch updates available, and people should install them, or at least have some kind of a policy to automatically install them by the network administrator. So that is one of the most important things that the IT department needs to do. And then we come up to the point of another hardening technique, and this hardening technique is basically called turning on logging and auditing. Now, why do we need to do that? As I've already mentioned earlier, when we were talking about logging and auditing in general, we talked about the fact that logging and auditing lets you monitor whatever changes have been made. Logging lets you keep a track of what has happened, who's used admin privileges, what they've used them for, what files did they access, why did they access them. And auditing where data is going and who's accessing can be helpful later on when you're trying to find out a particular weakness, or where people are using certain things, or are they accessing things that they shouldn't be accessing. So it's extremely important to have logging and auditing on for that purpose. So depending on the environment, we need to place additional features to supplement all of the tools that are built in the operating system with all of this. So you must understand logs themselves are useful, but they're actually useful after a certain event happens. It cannot help you while it's happening. Of course, you'll be reviewing it after an event, but they'll be very helpful in that case. Now comes the main topic of protecting against malware. Now, what is malware? Malware is just a general catch-all term that is used for malicious software. So a large concern is about protecting your networks and your storage devices and everything from it, and even so, through social engineering. But one of the most important things is to protect your operating system from it. And this is where this comes in. We've already talked about the WannaCry ransomware, and there are several other malicious softwares. I mean, there could be something as annoying but not very damaging, like opening up different websites without you even wanting them, or going to other search engines even though you're trying to search on Google search, or making copies of your files or hiding them. And there could be something as dangerous as the malware called Stuxnet, which the US was using to actually try damaging the Iranian nuclear program by actually physically causing their nuclear plants to melt down. So that is one of the dangerous ones. So those are some of the malware. So how do you combat the malware? You install anti-malware tools. There are several anti-malware tools, and they basically monitor your system for any kind of issues and any kind of malicious activity by any software. And as soon as they catch it, they immediately react. Now, anti-malware tools tend to work in a very similar way to how intrusion detection systems work. So they rely heavily on signature-based, detection and catching of malware. Like antiviruses themselves, they get updated. They have a database of all the possible ways that a malware may attack, and every time an attack happens that they think while they're running, these softwares are running in real time, and they think that a particular attack is happening, they try and match the pattern of that attack with what is written in their databases about different viruses and malwares. And if it matches, they alert the user, they alert the person using the computer. So malware signatures are usually updated by the creator of such software, and they need to be updated every day, or at least set it up to be updated as soon as a new one is available. So anti-malware tools generally detect malware in one or two ways, either by detecting the presence of something or the traffic that actually shows that a malware attack is happening. So either the malware is doing some kind of an attack, it's deleting files or creating copies or whatever, or it's moving some data somewhere. That's how they actually catch them, these anti-malware. So what they do is, once they catch them, they try and kill any kind of processes. What are processes? Processes are the pieces of software that are running by the permission of the operating system. When you actually go into the task manager by clicking Control Alt and Delete, that's what it lists, the processes. So each piece of software that you're trying to run may have several processes associated with it, or even one process associated with it, and it's assigned some CPU resources to run. Now what happens is, anti-malware, when they find out that a particular malware is running, they try and kill the process. Once they kill the process, they kill the files that have created those processes that are running and using the CPU's resources. And then they try, and if that files cannot be deleted,
they try and put those files into quarantine, which is basically a controlled environment where the malware actually locks up the file so that it does not cause any further damage. If they are unable to do so, they try deleting them, and even if that is not possible, they at least detect it for you and tell you that this file exists so the user can try and do something about it. So leaving the files just like that is of course not advisable, but sometimes there may be no possibility, and sometimes that file may require some user effort to actually delete or remove. Anyways, so we can find a lot of anti-malware that is also installed on mobile devices and individual systems and servers, which are also monitored, and we see this happening in large organizations and even cell phones. So this is why it is important. So people also install proxy servers, as we talked about in the last chapter, to prevent any kind of intrusion of such malware. And these proxies are also responsible for making sure that if a particular system is infected, at least it does not get spread to other systems through email or some other possibility, or through the network itself. Anyways, then moving on, another concept is executable space protection. Executable space protection is a hardware as well as a software based technology that can be actually implemented in operating systems. What it does is to stop malware. What it does is executable space programs protection prevents portions of the memory that the operating system usually uses to not be areas where any other application can run. This can be seen in the way that when you install Windows, especially Windows 7 onwards, you will notice a system reserved portion of your hard disk. So this is basically that portion of the operating system that the operating system controls and says no one will be able to run an application in this part of the memory. So this is designed to be just operating system only area. So think of it like the restricted area in any organization, where the authorized only personnel sit and do their work, all their controlling. This is exactly kind of like that. So this means any kind of attacks such as the buffer overflows. What are buffer overflows? Basically, a buffer overflow attack is where an application pretends as if it needs more memory space and tries to move into the space that is into the operating system, and and try and then run their code, their malicious code. So that cannot be done through this. So many operating systems also use address space layout randomization. What they do is they actually distribute this portion of the operating system's memory that the operating system requires into different parts of the memory, so that it would be difficult for an attacker to find out which particular portion is being used by the operating system. Anyways, so there's a description of the buffer overflow attack, which is pretty easy to understand, but let's look at it. It says basically it works as if by inputting more data than an application is allowed. So for example, if an application allows you only 1000 characters, like alphanumeric characters, in a particular field, let's say there's a box on a form that you can fill in and it allows only 1000 characters, alphabets and numbers. So what happens is, for instance, if that field only allows you to enter 1000 characters and you actually enter more than 1000, what happens to the rest? The rest actually get written to some part of the memory. They have to be written in some memory. Now, in most cases, it would be written within the memory of the assigned memory area of the application. But if the programmer has not made the code in a certain way, this extra information will then be written into a portion that may be part of the operating system. So technically speaking, I can send a message that I want to run a malicious code and write it in this field, and only some part of it will get inserted into the field. The remaining would spill over to the operating system and cause it damage. So executable space protection requires two parts to function: a hardware part and a software part. Both of the main CPU chip manufacturers, which is of course Intel and AMD, are supportive of this kind of concept of executable space protection. Intel calls this execute disable bit and AMD calls it enhanced virus protection. The software part of it is actually also common in most operating systems. Microsoft has it, and Linux has it, and Apple has it of course as well. So they all run some form of it or the other. Now let's move to the next concept, which is about software firewalls. We talked about hardware firewalls, which are actually designed systems that are going to protect you from connecting to outside networks and prevent specific pieces of data from going in or out of the network. Software firewalls are different. So we'll talk about software firewalls and host intrusion detection systems. So in addition to the tools that we can use on the network to detect and filter out any kind of traffics, such as firewalls themselves and intrusion detection systems, we can actually have host level implementing. Host level is like the system itself, the computer itself. So implementing similar tools. Although we may find firewalls and IDSs implemented on our network, in the form of purpose-built up, devices, the actual function that they perform and carry out is different. So similar software can be made. So let's look at software firewalls. So if you've got properly configured software firewalls, they can be really useful because they'll prevent you and they actually let you do a lot of controlling. So they're actually very similar in their operations to packet filtering and stateful packet inspection, which we talked about in the previous chapter, and they often have these rules. So unlike data traffic, they have rules about applications. So they have rules like whether or not to let this application talk to the network, whether or not to let this particular application send or receive a file, whether or not to let this application talk to this part of the network, or stuff like that. So these usually come with the operating system. You'll notice Windows already has its own firewall built in, and so does Mac OS X. So you usually have them. The second concept related to this is the host intrusion detection system. We talked about this when we were talking about intrusion detection systems in the previous chapter. Host intrusion detection systems are actually installed at the computer or the host level. They may have many advantages over the network-based intrusion detection systems, but are also limited in their scope because they're only going to be protecting one system, unlike the network ones. So just like software firewalls, they can be really simple ones or really complex ones. One of the weaknesses of the host intrusion detection system is that in order for the software to actually tell you that an attack is happening and it is happening in real time, it needs to communicate over the network. So if the host or the computer that we are trying to talk about is being attacked right now, obviously they cannot really be using the network to tell the network admin that they are being attacked right now. So that is one weakness it has, but it is still commonly used. Operating system security tools also include several other tools that we talked about. Some of them we talked about in chapter 10 as well, and some we will talk about right now. So we can use scanners to find out how our hosts are talking to other networks. Remember, scanners are softwares and even physical devices that let us find out how, which network ports are being used for communication and which are open. And it can and scanners can also be used for vulnerability assessment to find out what parts of my system are actually weak, are open to attacks. So privilege escalation tools to gain, which may be used to actually gain more access to things and to exploit different things. So these tools will be discussed one by one. So let's look at scanners. So we can use a large number of scanning tools to actually find out any kind of weaknesses and security flaws in our systems. So although we talked about them in 10 from network perspective, we need to talk about it from the perspective of looking at which ports are open, what service is running, what state is that service in. So similar to how it used to monitor networks for ports being open and which protocols are being used for what purpose, similarly we can use this to actually monitor our own computer, our own host. So again, as we discussed, we could use the example of Nmap to find out what parts of our system are prone to attack, what ports are open, and what services are running on those ports, and what pieces of data are they sending and receiving, to keep an eye on this particular thing. So these scans can actually, for instance, if I'm trying to find out whether my printer is being accessed and is being used and what services are running on it, I can find out what services are running on it. So I could be more careful about it. Anyways, so moving on, there are also several vulnerability assessment tools. Vulnerability assessment tools often often include some portion feature that you already have in things like Nmap, which is a scanner. So there are several such vulnerability assessment tools. One such well-known scanning tool or an assessment tool is Tenable, which is a company's name, tool called Nessus. Now Nessus was actually used to be a free tool, but now it's a paid tool. It's a very graphically nicely made tool that helps us find out weaknesses in our system, and you'll notice that there's a figure or 11.4 which actually shows a picture of all the ports and all the IP addresses, and tells you whether they are open or closed, or whether they are dangerous or are under threat. So that can be very helpful. Nessus will actually tell you which systems are possibly vulnerable and are weak. So this also includes several other abilities to add new possible weaknesses through a language that Nessus has called the Nessus attack scripting language. Now, another area that we need to look at is exploit frameworks, which is basically a category of tools that are actually called, it's actually a list of lots of tools that are connected together called the exploit framework. It actually came along in the year 2000 and is still being used. Many exploit frameworks actually use a variety of tools, which includes network mapping tools and sniffers and stuff, to find out weaknesses in our system. So exploits are small bits of software that take advantage of or exploit the weaknesses of our softwares or our applications or even our operating system. So exploits are usually used by attackers to gain access. Exploit frameworks such as, say, Rapid7, Metasploit, Sploit, and Immunity, Canvas is another famous name, and Core Impact are all of these that actually allow such exploits. So many exploit frameworks can come in the form of graphically interfaced tools, much in the same way the application functions do. So some of these tools can even be configured to automatically check our systems. So what they do is they attack your operating system to help find a weakness in it, and when a weakness is found, you can patch it up. So think of it, these tools as white hat hacking tools. In other words, you on purpose attack the operating system using these tools to find out the weaknesses and then eventually improve them. So then there's a discussion on the operating system's security in the real world. For instance, talks about how operating systems in different organizations use, especially ones that need to connect to the internet, use different clients, and make sure that those clients have anti-malware tools and host intrusion detection tools and software firewalls to make it pretty powerful. They also have several layers of them, not just one of them. So we need to know about these, and they also use tools like NISOS and Nmap to keep on assessing any kind of weaknesses in the system. So that's pretty much it for this particular chapter, and we will now be continuing with our 12th and final chapter on application security. So thank you.